So, ladies and gentlemen, it's been an interesting day in politics, and there's a few stories I want to cover that, to be frank, no one else is really covering at the moment. But before I do, can I yet again remind you, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, help me grow those numbers. And if you really want to support the work that I do, you're welcome to buy me a coffee. The link is in the description box below. So the first story I want to cover is actually the story of Toit. For those of you who don't recall who he was, this is actually a white student who went to Stellenbosch. And in May 2022, he was filmed urinating on the belongings of a fellow black student. Now, the video went viral and sparked national outrage, igniting debates on racism in university. Because, white people are all racist. Well, at least we were told. And Stellenbosch University took notes of the actual allegations, they took notes of the actual videos, and they were very swift to engage the propaganda machine and directly engage in forms of retaliation against Toit. At least they'd be called, racist. I mean, they are in Stellenbosch after all. And so what they did is they swiftly suspended him, and he was told that he would face disciplinary hearings by the Central Disciplinary Committee, and that could potentially lead to his expulsion, which it did. Now, you may recall that he was then on the front page of newspapers for some time, and we all heard for ages and ages and ages about how a white man or a white boy just has no respect for the black child. And we saw all sorts of racial discrimination actually occur against the Toit family. Now, it's actually important to remember that at the time that the black individual whose belongings were peed on actually said he was prepared to forgive Toit, because, to be frank, he knew that he was intoxicated. He didn't see that there was any form of racial elements to the actual attack, if you want to call it that. And as a result, he was willing to just let bygones be bygones. But the family said that they weren't, because he was traumatized and he wasn't sleeping, and apparently he was the victim of a horrendous racial attack. And as a result, the Stellenbosch University basically dismissed him. Now, he then sought relief of that from the Western Cape High Court, but if any of you have ever been through the courts, it's notoriously slow. And unfortunately, he wasn't able to stop his expulsion. So he was expelled from Stellenbosch University. Now, in typical fashion, the Kangaroo Court, also known as the South African Human Rights Commission, launched an investigation and condemned the acts as being dehumanizing, saying that they were going to pursue a case against him in the Equality Court. The NPA also wanted to get in on the action because it was creating a national kerfuffle, and as a result, the NPA laid charges against Toit. Now, it's important to understand, even before we have this discussion, how criminal law typically tends to work. We have what's called the actus reus, which is the actual act of doing something, and then we have what's called the mens rea, which is the intention behind it. Both elements are needed in order to secure a criminal conviction. Now, remember, the NPA went and pursued an actual case against Toit. Well, the criminal charges were laid against Toit, and he was charged with criminal injury and malicious damage to property. Now, remember, criminal law needs this degree of intention. Well, the problem is that in May 2025 now, the Stellenbosch Magistrates Court acquitted Toit of all charges on the basis that there was insufficient evidence to prove intent, criminal wrongdoings, or forms of racial motivation. Why was that? Because you couldn't prove intent or harm or intent to harm. And the problem was that the reason you couldn't do that is because Toit was intoxicated. He was drunk. He was a kid who was drunk, who did a stupid act, and he didn't really have a clue where he was. He didn't know if the person was white or black or whatever. And everybody at the time made that very clear. That is how it appeared. But as we saw the propaganda machine fall into play, apparently it was a racial attack, and therefore it's a racial attack because everything in South Africa is racist, right? Everything in South Africa is racist, even when it's not. And because it was a racial attack, it needed to be an example set all time. But it wasn't a racial attack. And here's the problem. His entire life has been ruined. His family have had untold misery on this. His reputation has been destroyed. for nothing more than trial by media and nothing more than what you might class as campus politics, because the Stellenbosch University wanted to show they were not racist. And they came down on Toit very, very hard. And as a result, Toit now says that he will be considering preparing a civil lawsuit against the university on the basis that the university acted recklessly and unlawfully, that they treated him as a scapegoat for their broader issues which they had in the university, this allegations of racism, because remember Stellenbosch, and that ultimately the expulsion was politically motivated, even though that's unverified. But it was, because we saw it. The South African Human Rights Commission, the trial by media, and all the rest of it that happened. The woke university politics ultimately led to Toit having his entire life ruined, but nothing more than the media and the woke university. And this is becoming too common in South Africa. We are seeing these stories time and time and time and time again. The universities, the schools, the workplaces, it's tiresome. It's very, very tiresome. The frequency at which this is occurring now, it's just too much. It's too much. Now, the university is being called to apologize to Toit. Will they? Don't know. What's an apology really going to do? It's pointless. At the end of the day, the civil rights groups all went through to sacrifice on Toit in the name of some form of racial sacrifice, if you will, to the gods of racism. It's just happening too much. It's just too much. And it's amazing that this has not been front news. And it never is. Do you remember young Bry? Oh, how racist he was because he refused to give somebody a boerie roll, even though he wasn't. And the retraction and the apology was like at the back of the newspaper and nobody focused on that. These things lead to serious reputational damage. I don't know how as a republic we still allow this, but apparently we do. Moving then on to the next story of today. And this is a story that many of you have emailed me about, and it's taken me a little bit of time to do some research on. And this is actually the story of the Islamic State of Africa application to become a political party in South Africa. Now, this is all being put forward by an individual who I'm not going to say a name because I don't want to get sued. Now, said individual basically has applied to get a license to form a political party so that he can contest the 2026 local elections in eThekwini. Why eThekwini? Well, there's actually a large amount of, so let's call them Muslim populations in that area. So he clearly thinks that he stands a good chance of getting his party elected. So what exactly does the party want? Well, the party stands for Sharia law in South Africa. They criticize democracy and advocate for a system that would reduce taxes and eliminate interest rates, because interest rates, according to Islam, is, well, prohibited. Now, the interesting issue here is basically around the criticism of democracy and the ushering in of Sharia law, which many individuals will say, well, we don't want that. The actual individual who's put forward the application is really the individual that has been subject to the most debates, because according to the media, in 2018, he was alleged to have been involved in a mosque attack. He is allegedly have also been in possession of illegal firearms, but all the cases against him have been withdrawn due to procedural issues. So he's never actually been convicted of anything. Now, you may look at that and go, South Africa, right? I mean, many such cases. Well, the US actually in 2022, the US Department of Treasury actually sanctioned this individual for allegedly leading an ISIS cell in Durban. And that cell had been involved in the raising of funds via kidnapping and extortion, and that they themselves were supporting other ISIS cells in Africa, specifically in the DRC and Mozambique, where two ISIS cells are. Many individuals call back to the possession of an illegal firearm in 2021, along with the 5,000 rounds of ammunition and the cell phone jammers that apparently he had, and said that these could have been linked to potential terrorist attacks that could occur in South Africa. But unfortunately, they were obtained without a proper search warrant, and as a result, procedurally, the cases was thrown out. But this didn't stop the US from sanctioning the individual and his family. So this has led many individuals to now ask the question, why do we want to allow an ISIS-linked political party to form a party in Durban, South Africa? And the problem is, ladies and gentlemen, he's never actually been convicted of a crime. So technically he can stand, even though he's made his position on Sharia law and he's been linked to various things. Technically he hasn't done anything wrong in the rules. And so you, ladies and gentlemen, are invited to comment on the registration of the party. DRSA is running a campaign, link in the description box. But ultimately, one has to ask the question of, on what basis will he be prohibited from forming his party? It's a good question. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. So let's actually move on to the final political story of today. And this is the debate that people are having with Grok on Twitter. Or X, if you want to call it that. Always be Twitter to me. In any case, the individuals are saying, why is it that Cyril Ramaphosa seems so adverse to dropping BEE in South Africa? And this follows the debate he had yesterday with Corné Mulder, because Corné, unfortunately, dared to suggest that maybe 31 years into democracy, South Africa had been transformed enough, and maybe it was time to work on an equal playing field, to which Cyril had a lot to say, and I covered that in the video yesterday. Cyril was not impressed, and he basically said that how dare he, because, reasons. Anyway, this has led individuals to ask online whether or not Cyril Ramaphosa, the well-known millionaire, a billionaire if you want to work in rands, was actually not wanting to get rid of BEE because he had actually benefited from BEE directly, and it had led to his, should we call it, wealth gain. And so Grok has been commenting on it. And actually, this is a subject that many individuals in the comment section quite often like to ask me. So I did the research, and here's the data. So for those of you who don't know, Cyril Ramaphosa got his wealth from a BEE investment through his firm, the Sankunda Group. Now, this firm, which was BEE aligned, also allowed him to gain shares in places such as MTN, Coca-Cola, and McDonald's, which allowed him ultimately to amass a net worth of 450 billion US based on 2015 data. Don't really have any updated data because according to the news, he allegedly had to sell a lot of these shares in order to become deputy president of the ANC. So that, he couldn't be alleged that he was bought and paid for. In any case, BEE actually opened the economic doors for Cyril Ramaphosa and did directly enrich him, because it was those policies that basically allowed him access to these structures of wealth, white monopoly capital, if you will. Now, this has led many individuals to ask the question of whether or not BEE was actually just serving elites more than the broader population, which is fair. Because as some individuals comment, BEE has not alleviated the structural inequality of South Africa, but rather has led to higher unemployment and stagnant economic mobility for the majority of individuals. Which again, according to Cyril, that doesn't happen because the World Bank said so. Even though that's not what the World Bank actually said the complete reverse of what he's alleging it says. But this led some individuals to then ask a further question which is worth exploring, and that is around Patrice Motsepe, who, if you don't know who he is, he's the brother-in-law of Cyril Ramaphosa. And he became the first black billionaire in South Africa via his mining rights, which he obtained via African Rainbow Minerals, or for short. Now, those policies that were implemented post-apartheid meant this individual was brought into the mining sector in order to fulfill the BEE requirements at the time. Now, he founded a company called Future Mining in 1994, just to show you how far back this goes, and that allowed mining services such as shaft clearings. By 1997, he purchased underperforming gold mines from Anglo Gold for 7.7 million US, using favorable and future earnings-based financials, on the basis that many individuals wanted to show a degree of BEE transformation occurring in the mining sector. Ultimately diversified into other minerals such as gold, platinum, coal, iron, and all of these things were granted through BEE regulations in order to be able to show a degree of black ownership for the purposes of the mining licenses. Remember, the mining licenses requiring to give 26% away to previously disadvantaged individuals. This has led many critics to argue that, to be honest, he only benefited from this because he was connected. He was connected to Cyril Ramaphosa, and this in itself fostered what they would class as crony capitalism. It's a good question. Is this crony capitalism? Many would say yes. You let me know what you think in the comment section below. But you see, these two instances of BE wealth generation has led some individuals to say, actually, it's the white people that have benefited the most from BEE. And more interestingly, when this has been asked of Grok, well, Grok had the following to say. Basically said that the data for this allegation was unavailable because you would have to prove fronting. This is where you basically present a false black ownership or management in order to qualify for BE, but it doesn't really exist, right? It's a fronted individual. It's your domestic worker who you're basically putting on as the CEO of a company and the owner of a company in order to get a contract, even though they don't actually work in the company. Now, according to the BBBEE Commission, 66.7% of the complaints in 2016, the data doesn't get updated very frequently, were all fronting related, and the demographics of their fronting were, well, not disclosed. And as we do know that there are forms of heavy fines and bans from doing businesses with the states of up to 10 years where a person has been found to have been involved in fronting. So the question is, how much fronting has occurred? How many people have actually been subjected to the fines and the banning and so forth? Because whilst we are sure that somewhat individuals have profited through fraudulent compliance, the overall scale of this you would expect to be just like huge, like it's just everywhere with all these people going to jail. And the reality is that's not what we're seeing. So you see, it's an easy allegation to make because it does happen. We saw this in Risk Technology Integration, a white-controlled firm which secured tenders under false BE claims. This is an example of it. It does happen. But is it on the scale that they say that this is just like all these white people are benefiting and actually why are they against BE? Well, the actual answer is, well, no, because the figures don't support that. And so overall, the actual scale of this, let's call it white beneficiaries corruption, was unprovable. It's unknown. So it's a simple allegation. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly why this is used as an allegation against all the white individuals that are against BE. Because you can't prove the alternative. The data isn't collected. It's an easy allegation to make. And at the end of the day, the public are becoming very skeptical of BE. Yes, it was intended for redistribution and transformation, but that's not what it's done. It's actually only promoted forms of elite enrichment. And everybody knows that. We've given you two examples of it just above. Anyway, these are just my comments. That was the news of today. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Until tomorrow, bye.
Ons hier in die Vrystaat vanaand kyk by my boesemvriend Toit. En met hierdie plaasaanvalle, hoe die boere nou rol, hulle het nou 'n nuwe tipe plaashond of 'n waghond wat hulle gebruik in die aande hier op die plaas. En ek beloof vir jou, daar is geen moeilikheid hierso in die aand met plaasaanvalle nie. Hallo my seun. Lobongola. Kom hier. Kom. So ja, baie goeie alarmstelsel op 'n plaas, natuurlike leeu. En dit is hartseer, maar as jy reine waarheid hierdie mense, dit is geensins aansit in 'n leuen hierdie nie. My vriend regtig waar hier word beplande plaas aanvalle beplan, hulle het die inligting gekry en hulle het geen ander keuse as om hierdie leeu in die aand om hulle plaashuis los te laat nie. Hulle het wel 'n manier om die leeu weer terug in die kamp te kry. Maar dit is tragies as ons boere tot sulke mates moet gaan omdat hulle onveilig voel. Dit is hartseer en die plaasaanvalle is iets verskriklik deesdae. Nietemin, dis nog steeds vir my 'n riem onder die hart en sag op die oog om 'n leeu in die aand so naby in die huis te sien. En jy kan nie anders as om te sê dit is maar jou beste waghond wat jy kan kry hierdie nie.
Ja, hy het al die getuie, hy het al die evidence op, jy weet, so.